We're back, everyone.
Alright. The next question asks, have you encountered individuals who have previously been closed off to spirituality, but with your aid are surprised with this part of themselves that has been neglected?
Yeah, for sure. I dated one for a long time. But certainly in a more professional fashion as well, but less so because I think anyone that seeks out any kind of guidance or insight from me, they chose me for a reason. I have a very different background than other forms of people that might be able to help them. So I think there's already something in them that's opened up, or they wouldn't have picked me. I would have just been this out there, non-traditional person. But more so in my personal life, I've encountered those kinds of things. Actually, in college, I'll tell you a story about when I was your age. One of my famous "when I was your age" stories.
I love those.
Yeah. Actually, in college, I lived with somebody for a while, a boyfriend, and he was very atheist. He'd been raised by atheist parents, and he would ask questions, and his parents would tell him, "We just don't think about that," or "We don't talk about that." And so, and I realize that's not. I'm not saying that's how atheism is, but that was his experience with his particular parents. And so I think he was someone who had questions and wanted to figure things out on his own, but was always told no.
It was closed off.
It was closed off.
Okay.
So he was very closed, and I was how I am now. And so we would have really intense, interesting encounters with each other, conversations and explorations, and he'd kind of play the role of, the logical scientist, and
The devil's advocate.
He was always that. But, he was usually the one bringing things up.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if he was playing devil's advocate to ideas, not to me, because he was leading the way with all of these doubts and questions. And then I would bring in my little mystical viewpoints. And so we eventually broke up, and I was still in the place we had. And when I was moving, I found this crumpled up piece of paper under the couch. And so I unraveled it, and it was in his handwriting. He had this really scraggly, weird handwriting, and it was undeniably his handwriting. Yes. And it said, "Trust in Jackie leads to God." And I thought, what? I'm like, did he write that when he was high? He did smoke weed every now and then. But what does that mean? And years later, thanks to Facebook, I actually got in touch, or this person got in touch with me, and I mentioned this funny thing. This is maybe 15 years later, 10 years later, a long time. And he said, yeah, I don't know if he said, yeah, I was high, but he said, I remember going through that time in my life, and I wanted to be a part of something bigger, and I knew that something bigger was our reality, and I knew that you knew it, and it wasn't set in me yet, but I knew if I could just trust in you, not that I was like his savior at all, but that I think he wanted to move more towards the way of moving through life that I had embraced.
So kind of like a guidance counselor, leading the way. Okay.
I don't know. He kind of felt like a little brother, I guess, and which is why the relationship didn't work out for other reasons as well. But I don't know. We helped each other as I think in any long-term relationship, mm-hmm. Most people do. One person will know more about something, someone else will know more about something else, and you help each other. Even in the difficult times, even when you're battling, there's a lesson in that you're learning things about relationships. Even if it's, I don't ever want to be in that kind of relationship again, or I never want to be with that kind of person again. That's definitely been my experience sometimes. Well, I learned that about myself. So I don't want to take a whole bunch of credit in that relationship. But for this particular activation that was going on inside him, potentially, I think he was giving our conversations and me credit with helping him move more towards, because I was nurturing, unlike his situation being brought up, I was nurturing to the curiosities he had. Yeah. I wasn't dogmatic about what I thought. I was like, hey, yeah, come explore this, or, well, maybe you don't need to think about things that way. Maybe there's another way of seeing things that also works in the world.
So I guess you were just not surprised, but like, I guess the surprise came later in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and yes, it did come much later.
Yeah.
And I think that happens. Sometimes things come immediately. Someone will say something, and it will immediately activate like a positive trigger inside of you, and boom, you're there. Or you'll have like I did some guided meditations recently with people, and different healings, and they immediately had clarity on questions they had. So things do come sometimes immediately when we'll set an intention, and at the end of the meditation they know exactly what they need to do, or so that happens too. But with more stubborn, because in my experience those people are already okay, I'm a little open. In my experience, if there's someone who's super closed off, it takes a little more chiseling to have a breakthrough. Or sometimes people need, arguably all the time, people need to come to the realizations on their own. So even if you're there to lead by example, or expose them to other ideas, until they actually live through an experience and have a direct feeling of God, they're not signing up for God existing until they're like, well, wait a second, now I get it. So I do think opening the door and saying, this might exist, look over there, is helpful. And then the surprise can come later when they actually are like, okay, I'm ready to walk through that door and allow myself to have that experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's clicking.
Yeah. I had a teacher, it wasn't a spiritual teacher at all, but he was very intelligent, and he said his students, he wasn't appreciated until like 5 years later, because they'd always get back in touch with him. And he spoke of himself very highly. He was like, I'm such a genius. I've developed this intellectual stoop. How really tall people always go like this because they're talking down to shorter people.
Yeah.
He said he had an intellectual stoop. He was so smart, he always had to stoop down to all us dummies. But he said it took his students like 5 years until they really got the things he was talking about. So they'd have these aha moments out in life and be like, that's what this meant.
Yeah, that goes back to what you were saying, like, I think this was recorded off camera, but you said younger people, I guess, need to have lived through the experiences to actually understand and have it click. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want someone to stoop to me. Where? Okay. That's interesting. Okay. The next question. What are some hurdles or veils that keep people from exploring their spirituality?
I think they're told they can't. And it might not come as firmly as that, but we're brought up within systems. We're brought up with parents that may have specific religious beliefs. We're brought up, the example of my friend, right? Whether you're atheist or Mormon or Catholic or whatever you are, there's a system of belief that somebody has, and they may make the choice. I know a lot of parents don't. They let their children decide. But I think many parents in many cultures have these little systems in place. And by default, you're told these other things are wrong, or you're going to hell, or whatever. There's really, we laugh about it, but there's it's actually like, it's a real thing. If you don't believe this, you will burn. And so then what do you do if you're someone who's having a spiritual experience that doesn't fit into this box over here that you're told is the way it's supposed to be? You're like, well, you might compromise those experiences and say, well, I'm just going to go over here where it's safe. Kind of that Maslow thing again. Like, I'm going to go where it's safe. So I think people are told they can't, or sometimes we're social creatures. We want to connect with each other. We want to belong. We're group animals. We don't want people, I don't think, we don't want people to perceive us as weird, or as not cool, or not part of the group. Not of the group. Yeah. So I think sometimes we might actually, there might be someone who knows better than the group, maybe, or has got a little something magical going on. But historically, we haven't been entirely receptive to those people either. When we burned young women at the stake, like we crucified Jesus, if there indeed was a historical Jesus. I mean, look at what some of these people who were, whether it was
Have
sharing,
different ideologies.
they had different ideologies that went against whatever the ideologies were at the time. And I know it's
Is
like,
that a dog?
no,
It's a
this is
suitcase.
better than TV watching out the window
I
here
know.
because nobody can see inside, and so they do so many weird
I know,
things.
I've walked out and I'm like, which one?
Oh yeah,
Where are they?
there's great stuff that goes on there. But yeah, so there's I think we're told we can't, and that's one of the biggest reasons we don't from a very young age.
Yeah, I know a few people who have experienced it myself. I've also experienced it myself. We'll be right back.
Oh, it's John.